The title for our particular session for the next hour from 2 to 3 is Appropriate Human Development, Capital Development for Innovation in Africa. And this is, of course, resonates with the theme, as I understand, of the Bio-Africa Digital Convention for 2021, which is really looking essentially at how do we foster a culture of innovation, research, and that can help us to be able to promote Africa's capabilities to respond to the pandemics that we foresee that will be probably a landmark feature of generations to come. This of course occurs in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic that has been underway since March 2020 and being radiating throughout the global population, and has really turned things on its head and forced us as a country and as a continent for that matter to think carefully about how do we prepare for better resilience and robustness in ensuring that current and future generations, including of course our economies and civil societies, can withstand the impact of these global threats that are driven by a combination of different circumstances, climate change vectors, of course, mass cheap agriculture, and other natural occurring mutations in natural systems that then create challenges for human health across the world. And in the context of the TRIPS waiver, how do we, not just as a country, but also as a subcontinent and as a continent of Africa, best prepare ourselves, develop not just the manufacturing capabilities, but upstream capabilities of R&D, of basic and applied research, and how do we stitch that together with an innovation pipeline that can generate new health products and services that can help us to better respond to the issues of our time? And how do we develop a whole value chain that can ensure over time Africa can be less dependent upon imported APIs and finished products from across the world? How do we smartly develop a culture of innovation, industrialization, that will ensure that our continent's population, would be able to have the necessary resilience? So today we're talking really about the human capabilities that we need to build and to support in order to boot up this important challenge that faces all of us together. It's not only a conversation about South Africa, as the title reads, it's about innovation in Africa. So we're really looking at the Pan-African context and how can we take advantage of our population, economies of scale, the human talent that are spread across the African continent in a way that can help us to generate the sort of outcomes that we want. Now, I've got 3 panelists here that have joined us. And I will just introduce them now. They're all professors. Professor Jasper Rees is the Vice Chancellor of Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, BUAN for short. And, he's previously worked at the University of the Western Cape, my alma mater, some many years back. And so I'm delighted to see Jasper on the panel, and thank you for agreeing to speak, to share some thoughts on this. And then secondly, Professor Mosa Matsabela from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He's currently an acting Deputy Vice Chancellor at the university, but has also held the positions until recently of Dean in the School of Nursing and Public Health Sciences at the university, and a colleague that I think a number of you perhaps would be familiar with in his regular talks on the COVID-19 pandemic itself. And then the third colleague is someone that I'm sure all of you, a number of you would know, my friend and colleague, Professor Tsilitsi Marwala, Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, and someone who does important breakthrough work in artificial intelligence. And Tsilitsi and I go back a long way, and we often have these ongoing debates about AI and its limits and its possibilities for humankind. So I'm really happy to have you guys here. And for the next, few minutes, I would like each of you perhaps to just give some introductory remarks to the topic at hand. I'm going to ask Jasper to start, and then to follow by Mosa, and then Selitsi. And then I will try to facilitate a discussion between the four of us around a number of key questions, if you don't mind. So, right, let's go over to Jasper. Thanks.
Thank you, Derek, and welcome to all of the audience. We can't see you, but we're there. We're sure you're there in your hundreds. I think that the question of appropriate human capacity development is one which, I mean, it's one I've been engaged with all of my career, from being a student in the UK through 15 years at UWC and that's nearly a decade at the Agricultural Research Council before coming to Botswana. And it's one which we all face the challenge of, what are the young people going to do with what we teach them? And are we teaching them in ways that encourage them to be innovative and to be entrepreneurial? And I think it's important to differentiate those two terms, because innovators are not necessarily entrepreneurial, and entrepreneurs don't necessarily have to be innovative. And some of them are both. And of course, some people are neither. And that's a bit of a human trait, I think, as to who you are. And the question then becomes, can you train people to innovate? Can you train them to be entrepreneurs? And I would like to think we can, because if we can't, then all of our education systems will become a bit pointless, in fact. So at the same time, it becomes a question of looking at what is the balance of skills and what type of skills do people need. We tend to think in universities that, everybody must do a master's and a PhD, be a postdoc. And I can remember on one occasion asking my class what did they all want to do, and half of them put their hands up and said they wanted to be professors. And it was quite a large class, and it was actually a little disturbing in a way, because I had to explain to them that actually there weren't that many professors in biochemistry in South Africa right now, and so they couldn't all be professors. But in fact, many of them did go on to do PhDs, and one of the things that's astonished me from UWC days is the high proportion of people who went on to do PhDs from that program in what was then biochemistry, later biotechnology. And in fact, many of them will be in the audience today. I think looking at the list of speakers, it's rather gratifying to see so many people I know, some of whom I trained, some who I influenced, some of whom I probably annoyed, but there we are. So I think the question of how do we train, and we think about postgraduates, but of course, not everybody goes on to do a PhD. And some people, and there are some really good examples of people who've come out of those sorts of programs and gone on to be very entrepreneurial. I'm not going to name names, but I can think of some really good examples of people who are in this conference, speaking in this conference, who went straight into being an entrepreneur, often in their parents' garage, as opposed to a university laboratory, and have done really exciting things in that space afterwards. So I think we shouldn't pigeonhole what people are going to need to learn, but there's no question about it that people need to gain skills and experience and real expertise if they're going to innovate in the kind of space we are describing, which is a knowledge-based economy and a science-based economy. And there are many examples of people innovating and being entrepreneurial in other spaces, in low technology spaces, and agriculture is full of such examples globally. And those are important spaces to be in as well. But I think that in many ways, what we're looking at in this discussion is really, we're unfortunately, when we're all senior academics, there's a tendency to think that we've got to talk about what we should be doing in that tertiary education space within the economy. And unfortunately, I think that's a bit of a trait that we all suffer from, but perhaps we don't suffer from it, perhaps we just propagate it. But let me stop there and let other people say things, and then we'll pick up from there. Chalisi, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jasper. I've just asked for some opening remarks, and I'm going to ask to just give you a chance to breathe. Mosa, perhaps to share some thoughts, and then I will ask you to just do a follow-up on your side as well, and then we can have a discussion going. Thanks.
Derek, if you can allow me, I just want to share one slide just to show colleagues something that we've been working on and thinking about, and it's got to do with work that I had to do as part of COVID-19. And really what we were doing is we were working with the German government, a department in the German government, to basically explore opportunities for investment in this area of COVID-19 vaccines as a way of trying to respond to the problem of vaccine inequity. And of course, this was earlier in the year, around March, April, before many of the developments that sort of subsequently arrived from the WHO and Pfizer and so forth. But at the time, basically, we had to look at what infrastructure is available for the value chain in terms of vaccine production and manufacturing in South Africa. And we spoke to quite a number of experts across the country in research and development, in academic institutions, in research councils. We spoke to people in manufacturing, biotechnology. We spoke to people in government, different parts of government departments. We also then spoke to a number of people who are supporting government from outside. And some of them were basically evaluating the whole value chain across Africa as a whole. And in all of this, I think, even though our interest was to look at the infrastructure, it quickly emerged that you cannot look at infrastructure without looking at the human capital. Because you could have offers for investments to build the different infrastructure and different systems that are needed. But if you don't have the people to operate them, people trained adequately to do the work, then it becomes a problem. So, of course, when we looked at the whole value chain, we knew that in South Africa, we're very good with the upstream in terms of the R&D. In many respects, there are pockets of excellence when it comes to vaccine development in South Africa. And also in terms of the downstream, when it comes to clinical trials and fill and finish and packaging, we're very good. But the space in between, the midstream, was where the gap was that we identified. And some people called it the valley of death, because that's where we were not able to produce the active pharmaceutical ingredients that were needed, the APIs that were needed for vaccine development. And we did not have the pilot facilities, and we don't really have the regulatory body is not able to provide assessment at this level of CGMP and all of that. And so it struck us that, yes, we've got gaps in our value chain, and we could drive the investments in the necessary infrastructure to build pilot facilities, leveraging some of the things that already existed from previously, leveraging the infrastructure that already exists in different pockets of the country. But the gap was then going to be in terms of the people that are trained to do this. And for me, I think what we're going to need is to really think about how to train people with the value chain in mind, because we're good at the university to train people with the research, and then parts of biotechnology can train people in a specific area of expertise. Sometimes we just train people in clinical trials, but we don't necessarily then have the full value chain. And we've been in discussions with other partners, including CSIR, to look at how we could train people with the value chain in mind and build capacity in that way, starting off, of course, with the strengths that we already have in our ecosystem in South Africa, but then building from that. So these lessons, I suppose, will apply for other parts of Africa as well, especially those countries, colleagues that have some manufacturing capabilities like Senegal, Egypt, Tunisia, and others. But I'm sure as a whole, the whole continent is going to need to think about how we train people, and also how we train people from different countries using the different resources we have more broadly on the continent. You might find people have to go to other countries for specific areas of training, but we have to keep that value chain in mind, keep strengthening that ecosystem. Let me pause there, and I can comment further.
Thanks very much, Mosa. Appreciate that. And Tselitsi, you want to share some initial thoughts on your side?
No, thank you very much, Derek, for that introduction. In 2007, when the South African government established its inaugural industrial policy plan, it was noted that the revival of the manufacturing sector had to be at the core of the strategy, given its role in job creation and global competitiveness. Of course, given the fact that we are living in the fourth industrial era, maybe the global competitiveness seems much more achievable than the job creation part. Deindustrialization has seen the country's manufacturing base decline from 21% of the GDP in 1995 to 13.53% in 2019. Since 1989, local manufacturing has shared 500,000 jobs as its share of GDP has shrunk. The decline in the sector has been attributed to various factors, such as low demand, a lack of competitiveness, negligible economic growth, and slow recovery from economic and political volatility, compound to present little prospect of improved performance, amongst other factors. In 2017, Garth Strachan, the Deputy Director General of the Department of Trade and Industry, argued that, and I quote, "South Africa's industrial policy is not working, leaving the nation to continue down its current path of deindustrialization." As we began to establish our 4IR national blueprint in 2019, we knew it was imperative that it spoke to the reindustrialization of the country and the increase in global competitiveness. The manufacturing cycle, which serves as the industry's voice, estimates that if manufacturing were to have an appropriate share of GDP for South Africa's developmental stage, around 30%, between 800,000 to 1.1 million jobs could be created. Across the globe, manufacturing has been reimagined in the context of the 4IR. Disruptive digital technologies such as predictive analytics, additive manufacturing, machine learning, and artificial intelligence and industrial Internet of Things have brought with them new efficiencies which have driven productivity and competitiveness. The question that we have to ask is how widespread are these developments in technologies being adopted in South Africa? And the second question that we ought to ask is whether it is universities, whether it is reskilling in industry, how effective is that in generating the required human capital to be able to put our economy back to competitiveness. So the use of 4IR technologies can aid in driving prices down in the sector to improve global competitiveness while identifying niche manufacturing areas where South Africa can compete. Part of the reason why South Africa has not been able to compete is because the cost of production is very, very high. How do we reduce the cost of production? Technology is one of the things that we ought to do, but also we must have appropriate people who can be able to do the job much more effectively. Already there are numerous industry programs for skills development developed with companies. For instance, the Department of Higher Education and Training section of the bigger department now is partnering with the DTI and the manufacturing industry to establish skill center for skilling and reskilling. Centers of specialization have been established for skills transfer, and the DTI is also partnering with the CSIR and industry to establish learning factories in several provinces. The NTIP currently has a working model for the manufacturing sector, which allows a systematic approach to an industry sector with whole value chain participation driven by technology such as artificial intelligence to provide a coordinating mechanism which makes the system efficient, proactive, and comprehensive. Yet more has to be done. Building capabilities through education and research development and innovation is a prerequisite to national economic competitiveness. But this has to be done alongside dedicated policy interventions, such as industrial policies that emphasize incentives, SME programs, and incubators. The Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution has also proposed the establishment of a platform for advanced manufacturing and new materials that will explore how to deepen automation so that South African companies remain competitive, and also how to automate industry so that they become safer and more productive by means of 4R technologies. I do understand that whenever I go to DEDLAC and I go and interact with the unions, this issue of jobs is always brought to the fore. The issue is that if we do not invest in advanced ways of production to make South Africa's industry competitive, what is going to happen is that jobs are going to migrate to areas where competition is actually quite high. So the issue of the resulting unemployment is very important, and we have to deal with it. Then issues such as universal basic income must come to the fore, and taxing of robots must also come to the fore. But it is imperative that we up the productive forces so that our industries remain competitive. Our universities must obviously be much more linked with industries. This disconnect between industries and our universities has to be broadened. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Silitsi, for that. You gave me a couple of nice nuggets to work on to enjoying hopefully a discussion amongst ourselves. Maybe I should just zoom in on exactly that. If you like, the Janus-based nature of universities, in a sense, they are apex institutions. They're looking at sort of like the high end of science and technology and innovation, and they probably best built to support higher levels of manufacturing and industrialization, as you rightly point out. How do we make sure that part still continues so that a high-end R&D and innovation and manufacturing and industrialization is stimulated in a whole range of diverse sectors of economic regeneration, from agriculture to manufacturing itself, to mining and so on, and yet at the same time create feedback loops that will allow that economy to have value chains that also generate skills development and innovation at the intermediary and the lower levels of the economy, low skill levels, so that we can absorb larger numbers of semi-skilled or inappropriately skilled staff members or people that have been laid off that can be trans-skilled or right-skilled or upskilled, so that we do not only as universities foster the elite economy at the top, if you like, as Thabo Mbeki once spoke about, but we find a way in which the university can connect, maybe perhaps through TVET colleges and occupation and trades and CETAs and so on, to ensure that there is, articulation vertically in the system. So maybe some comments from any one of you colleagues on that. How do we connect the university not only at the top, but also at the bottom of the skills brackets?
Maybe I can come up with here. And Derek, you have actually touched a very crucial point. How do we develop South Africa without leaving a lot of people behind? And this is even at a difficult point where there is a clear evidence that different types of work is emerging. So there are only two routes in which we can do that. The first one is we have to get to upskill as many of those people who are on the low side of work as possible, so that we can be able to put them where production is actually going. So we have to do as much of that as possible. And then the second part is that the jobs that are going to remain are the jobs, the physical job that are going to remain are jobs that require a human touch. Then we can obviously try to get as many of those people into those jobs that require human touch as possible. But this is not a solution. I think this is the greatest problem of our time. How do we have an inclusive economic development in the 21st century? Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone of Jasper, you spoke earlier about the university-centric way of thinking. We are, in a sense, how do we box out of that? And whilst not playing to areas of our weakness, but how do we articulate better in the rest of the skills economy? Are there any innovative models for example, in Botswana that you're looking at?
Well, we're trying to explore a couple of directions which will help us to get young people into a better space, because yes, we're a university, it's a university-centric model, but agriculture has the capability to be very high tech. It has the capability to be 4IR in lots of areas of advanced technologies, both for production and for monitoring and all the systems that can go with controlled environment agriculture, for example, precision agriculture. But all of those increases in technology are going to result in the loss of jobs. And if one looks at Africa across the whole of the continent, 80% of people are employed in agriculture. And while there are some optimistic statements like, 65% of the world's remaining arable land is in Africa, actually that's probably not true, in the sense that much of that land is very poor. It has inappropriate rainfall. Much of it is in areas that needed conservation in terms of biodiversity and so on. So there are lots of challenges around that space. At the same time, the population is going to grow to 4 billion people, is the estimate, by the end of the century. So there's a lot of mouths to feed as well. And the question becomes how to bring technology of an appropriate sort into agriculture to increase productivity. Much of the productivity is very low. I mean, in Botswana, the productivity of maize and sorghum production is down. It sits at around 0.5 ton a hectare. Now that compares with about 5 tons a hectare in South Africa. And so you can't look at it and say it's a different agroecological zone. It's drier here, it's hotter here, but it isn't a completely different world. And so then when we have to look at what technologies are being used, there are a whole range of answers that sit in there as to what isn't working. But in terms of what we're doing, we've taken a block of money and said we'll create a graduate entrepreneurship program to get people into agriculture as a business. Much of the agriculture in Botswana is, with due respect, appears more of a hobby. People have a full-time job and then they have a farm and then they have a cattle post, and it's not driven as a business. Whereas, and in parts of the South African agriculture sector, of course, that's true also. So I think when we look at our sectors, it's productivity is a scary concept, but the reality is that all through our lives, you only have to go back 50 years and say, how did we process a letter? And the answer is, a secretary would process a few letters a day on a typewriter. Today, we all WhatsApp each other and have Zoom meetings and all of these things. And we don't think of that as a massive jump in the use of technology. It's crept up on us over our lifetimes. But if anybody offered me a manual typewriter, I wouldn't actually know how to use it, I don't think. It'd certainly break my fingers banging away. So I think, we see those sorts of changes coming through, and they come through all the time. Are they going to be the sort of radical, rapid changes? Well, yes, if you mechanize in agriculture, if you introduce precision agriculture, it's a radical mechanizing, radical change in the technology space. And the question then becomes, do you look at it and say, we had 25 workers to produce 1 ton of carrots. Now we have 25 workers to produce 25 tons of carrots. Or do you say, we only need 2 workers because now we only need 1 ton of carrots? And the answer, of course, in agriculture is we're going to need 25 tons of carrots instead of 2 tons. And so we need the 25 workers, but we need them to be able to use technologies to become more productive. Does that require that they all have PhDs? No, absolutely not. But we've got to have people in the system who can provide the support and development and expertise to use the data that's coming, whether it's from precision machinery, remote sensing, Earth observation, data off satellites, or whatever it happens to be. So we need all of those skills, and we need a spectrum of skill sets across the system. But there will always be a role for people who've got, relatively low skill sets, not zero skills. Clearly, but there will always be a need for people across that spectrum. And I think if there's not, then it's going to be a very strange world indeed, where the only people who are employed are highly skilled, super high technician, highly technical people, and everybody else gets to sit and watch and has no way to contribute. And I think that is a very, very challenging space. So I think we've got to look at the balance of things as we go forward.
All right. Can I shift the focus of perhaps our discussion, colleagues, away a little bit from automation, use of machines, and that interesting interface between humans and machines, as important as that is, and important as it is also with respect to the issue of labor, gainful employment and employability for future generations. I just wanted to put the needle back onto the whole thing about training and other non-training interventions that we can make to stimulate innovation in the way that Mosa, I really wanted to relate this to what you was talking about in the vaccine innovation space and the important opportunities there. But if I pull it a bit larger than vaccines, because I think vaccines is one part of the equation, we also need to look at antiviral therapies, monoclonal bodies and other kinds of health therapeutics that we can harness both for humans and animals, in the next few generations going. And of course, a range of other health products and services that would be adapted to the conditions peculiar to Africa and South Africa in this instance. How do we stimulate that culture of innovation beyond training? The point that Jasper was making earlier, are there non-training interventions that we can make to link to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurialism that you can think of, Mosa, in the space that you work in?
Yeah, very complex question. I think that you're opening a can of worms in a sense, because and going to the heart of the issues. Yeah, I think the first thing to note is the fact that if you step back and look at the whole landscape. In South Africa, take South Africa as a case study, as an example. We don't really, in biotech, we haven't mapped out the full ecosystem of the different pieces that are at play. And we actually had to figure out what that ecosystem might look like on the spot as we were working on the piece of work we were doing. And one of the things that was so interesting for me that came out was not only beyond the mapping of the value system and identifying where the value of death is, and actually realizing that there are some institutions in South Africa, like the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, that are by legislation positioned to be able to create a link between the upstream of research and development and the industry, the commercial side of things. And I found that really interesting. And the question that we were then asking was, but are we optimizing this legislated role of an institution like this? What other institutions are there? Because now you're finding that an institution like that is now beginning to dabble in manufacturing itself, when actually it is a body that could coordinate an ecosystem. And then we also saw that there is a role for the South African Medical Research Council, but also it doesn't necessarily do what CSIR is not positioned to do what CSIR is able to do. And for me, I found it so frustrating that we've got these amazing institutions that and bodies that could potentially help us build the full ecosystem. But we focus a lot on specific projects here and there, pockets of good work that is happening. And I don't want to undermine that in any way. But I did see it as a missed opportunity. And eventually, for example, we were discussing a potential partnership with a major drug company to train people in their program that they've been running all over the world in terms of lab space, but labs for manufacturing. And when we were thinking about it, we were like, but who would be the best partner to help us in the South African context? It was CSIR. We could not find anyone else who could help with that. So here, Derek, one problem that I'm seeing is that, we are fragmented. We haven't really defined the important value chains and pathways and the ecosystems that need to be there for us to be able to say to a new entrant, say, look, this is the space you are entering. This person plays this role, this one plays this role, and begin to define the connectedness. That was the first thing. The second thing that I just want to highlight is that it became quickly very clear that there are parts of the work, if one looks at it around innovation, that are rewarding. And there are parts of it that are not immediately rewarding. And if you look at a university space, for example, a lot of the people that are doing innovation and they are inventors, the current system of rewards kind of punishes them in many ways and makes it very difficult. And they are not necessarily given the special space to be able to work with that sort of high level technology, science and technology that they need. And having to create those spaces kind of creates a bit of a tension. It's almost like you are giving people special treatment and you're creating some sort of elitism around people who are highly specialized. And it becomes contested because everyone is saying that we want fair play. So for me now, it's almost like now you've got this group that's doing amazing work. They need to get top students to come and work with them. But everyone is saying, but why must you get special treatment? So there is a culture there, Derek, that we have created in our system over the years. Even as we became research intensive, we did not focus on creating a culture for innovation. And somehow, even though there shouldn't be conflict between research in the standard way that we do it and innovation in the way that we would like to really do it properly in higher education, there shouldn't be a tension. But at the moment, it does feel like there's tension from the different people that we keep talking to. So I think that we have to resolve that because it becomes difficult to then introduce, young, gifted, talented students and trainees into a system that is fragmented and in some ways toxic in its kind of competition. And it doesn't have that sort of healthy competition. And now you also want to draw investors and industry into that space. They're not going to have the tolerance for the kind of confusion and the fights and all of that the tags of war that happen in that space. And currently, for me, I feel like we need to quickly build that whole system and fix it and make sure that we've got the ecosystem, we've got the value chain, we know who does what, and then we've got the places, the strategy for how we're going to train people. And there's no, tensions there. Instead, what we are seeing is synergies of how one fits into the next. And once we've done that, and we can do it with science parks and other things, but some people argue that science parks haven't really worked. But I think that there is an opportunity to be able to create sort of mini science and technology worlds that people can then begin to see how things fit together. And that way we can then optimize those synergies. Let me pause there. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mosa. You raised such a lot of issues now that it also spun me in different directions. So let me switch on to something somewhat different. If I could maybe ask you guys, any one of maybe a combination if you want to comment on, is there a need, first of all, for new types of network models that can help us to achieve the problem of scale and impact, that we can resonate across not just a larger geostrategic or geoeconomic environment or geosocial environment, but also across different disciplines that we need to hold together in order to solve problems, existential problems, whether it's on climate adaptation or mitigation technologies, whether it is on the human-computer interface, solving the problem of employment and so on. Are there models of networks that might be required that is not currently strong enough in the system, that we have to maybe raise the floor for innovation? And I'm thinking, for example, to go back to Mosa's example about vaccines, what we've done on the genomic sequencing networks that Tulio and other colleagues have stitched together under duress. And of course, it's an instinct of human beings under duress. We do the most amazing things, only to slip back in our own habits afterwards, to have territorialism and our competitive instincts. But the question that I really wanted to ask, maybe Jasper, some comments, Selitsi, is there a case to be made that we need larger, more innovative networks that can help us to do things at scale? Because the problems that confront humanity from the early to the mid-21st century are of such orders of magnitude that they actually require newer platforms. And our system has been designed around individual institutions, as an institution-based system, and it has its virtues. It has gained tremendous amount over hundreds of years, but therein also lies its limitations, because it tends to be focused on what is prestigious for my institution and for your institution and so on. So long story short, colleagues Telitsi or Jasper, any comments on new networks that might be interesting for us to look at?
No. Thank you very much, Derek, for that important question. And of course, yes, we need to pursue new models of collaboration. But before we do that, we need to first understand what is the problem with our current model of collaboration. I think the big problem is actually lack of trust. Because if this ecosystem that Musa was talking about has to be created, then you will have to have a good collaboration between capital, because government capital is simply not enough. You also need venture capital, universities, and science council, and obviously society is a big stakeholder here. And what I have seen, when you go to the CSIR, you go to the Agricultural Research Council, the absence of big companies is actually quite loud. I don't see. When I go there, I don't see big banks. I don't see even big mining companies. I don't see money being poured into the CSIR from private capital. So we need to create trust. And part of the reason, what is even, I was quite disappointed to learn that. De Beers was actually building huge capacity for research and development in Europe, and this is a South African company. Then now, if we can go over the lack of trust, what are some of the collaborations that we need to bring to the fore? I think, certainly from a university perspective, I think sabbaticals of people going to spend in industries is very important, because the traditional model of sabbatical is a very important way of creating linkages, is for an academic to go to another university. How about if we can get half of our academics to go to industry, and what will be the innovative consequences of that? I think that is quite important. And we should not be shy to go to the big centers of the world. Silicon Valley is a great example. In China, for example, they have their own place which is rich in ecosystem. We should not be afraid to partner, certainly at the government level, Derek, you should take our minister to Silicon Valley and its equivalents in China, and meet some of these people, because South Africa simply has a lot that it can be able to offer. Then the issue of multidisciplinarity. I just, in my latest book, Leadership Lessons from 50 Books I read, one of the books is called Range. Range is who is a better sportsman, Federer or Tiger Woods? Tiger Woods specialized. Federer started playing soccer, tennis, and all sorts of other sports. He was a generalist and then focused, And the advantage of educating somebody from the general to the specific is that in an environment where things are changing very, very quickly, the person who started off as a generalist tends to adapt much, much better than the specialist from day one. And that obviously talks about almost re-looking at our entire higher education curriculum to make it much, much more multidisciplinary. We have adopted JASPA, our educational system from the British. They specialize too early. The A levels is already 4 courses, and it's still high school, whereas the American system tends to be to nurture generalists, and perhaps that explains why Facebook and Twitter and other companies are in the United States, not the United Kingdom. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Jasper, you got anything to add on this issue or different slant?
Well, I think we have to avoid siloing, and siloing is a great feature of the South African system. So in the 25 years I've been here, I mean, it's, everybody wants their own thing, and they don't want to go to Bloemfontein to use an electron microscope, and they certainly don't want to go to Pretoria. And, there are all sorts of boundaries and barriers that are purely artificial in addition to the geographical ones. And you couple that with the overall lack of investment. I mean, if we look at our system and then we say, what do we have? Because I always like to compare it with Oxford, and I say, if South Africa's got 1, Oxford's got 5, and and the levels of investment, the depth of investment. I mean, everybody thinks that COVID-19 vaccines popped out of Oxford overnight, but they didn't. They were the consequence of a 20-year-long investment in a vaccines institute that was packed with people who were developing the tools that meant they could switch to COVID-19 and produce a vaccine within 3 months. And everybody was surprised, but the people who wouldn't have been surprised were the people doing it themselves, because that capacity had been assembled. And we don't assemble the capacity because when we're spread out all over the country, which is inevitable, and we haven't ever been willing to say, let us focus biotechnology in Cape Town, nanotechnology in Polokwane, and something else in Mahagain. Instead, everybody wants to do everything, and we do a little bit of everything, and that makes it difficult for us to do it to the critical mass that you need to be able to roll out. So there are people who have rolled things out. There's some spectacular examples of companies in the biotech space which have grown to enormous size and been bought out, and there are other small ones which are getting going, and then inevitably there are others which are struggling to get going. And at the same time, there's this intense competitive feel. And the competition shouldn't be the guy on the other side of South Africa. The competition is the guy in Argentina or the United States or Russia who's actually your competition in the international market. And this is something we're not good at getting to understand. And if we could get that better, we would make more progress. But it often would mean people have got to say, I accept you've got this piece of technology, because you've got the expertise to drive it. And when I need it, I'll come to your lab, even if I drive 4 hours down the road. And I won't try and duplicate what you do because I can't do it as well as you can. But the bit I do well, I'm going to work with you to make that work. And this is something we're really not good at. And we imprint this behavior on our students. So the next generation does the same thing because they saw that example coming from the senior people. And even if we don't realize it, we all, unfortunately, I'm going to say, we all carry this behavior forward. And so the question becomes, how do you shake it out of the system? And if I had an easy answer to that, Botswana would be better than South Africa. Or I don't have an easy answer to that. We're going to struggle with the same challenges here. And I think we do struggle with the same challenges here. We all say we don't want to, but we do. And that's you know, the reality is we shouldn't, I mean, this conference, and I'm going to say this before the meeting, before the session ends, this conference is exceptionally South African this year. Through the list of speakers, I don't want to claim they're the only person from outside South Africa, but I've got a sneaky suspicion I'm the only person on the program who's named who's not in South Africa this year. That's really awful, because they all think I'm a South African. Meaning Botswana, they all think I'm a South African. South Africa, you all think I'm a Brit. So there we go. You know, but there we are. So I think, you know, we should be looking at SADC. We should be saying, what can we do within SADC that we are able to build the networks within SADC? Not sitting in Botswana thinking, you know, we can't work with South Africans because they're the big guys over the border. We should be looking from here. We should be looking into South Africa and saying, what are the opportunities? What can we offer? What can we work with? South Africa should be looking at Botswana and Namibia and Zimbabwe and Malawi and say, what can we offer those countries? Not to take their best and brightest away, but to bring our skills into their space and add value, so that we are then addressing a market of a quarter of a billion people instead of markets, which, I mean, here it's 2 million people. That isn't a sustainable market for anything we can produce except food. Our market is not sustainable. So the value chains is critical. The siloing has to end. And in some cases, that means people have to say, we're going to help another organization somewhere else to build up the capacity they're strong in. And this is the long challenge, and we all know the history, and we've all been part of it over the last 25 years of trying to make that kind of change happen, while at the same time, of course, we're all looking not to lose out ourselves and for our institutions. And I don't know the answer, because if I did, we'd all, you know, then we wouldn't have a problem. If we knew the answer, we wouldn't have a problem here, but we have a big problem. And I'm afraid to say, I think we're perpetuating it in the next generations by encouraging them to see the same siloing behavior, which I'm afraid to say, we collectively, our generation, hey, we're the old guys now, our generation has made these things happen. And it's a shame, because 25 years ago, we all thought we'd break out of it, but somehow we didn't.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for those really profound, you know, key messaging. I mean, I did say, you know, at the beginning, this topic is not about South Africa only, but although you say perhaps the way the program has been constructed, I can't, unfortunately, can't take responsibility for that one. An invited guest, I guess. But this issue about how do we construct a system that can play to the instincts, what Bowles and Ginty's, you know, well-known education theorists, you know, speak very eloquently about, you know, in our evolutionary instincts, in our DNA, are essentially two impulses. One is, of course, you know, the selfish, you know, individualist drive in the human being, the competitive drive to survive and so on. And the other one is a cooperative species. And the reason for why Homo sapiens has succeeded over several millennia next to its other cousins that got exterminated in the process or died out in the process is precisely because of its success in collaborating. And we can design an ecosystem at different levels and different dimensions that can appeal to that cooperative genius of communities, you know, of clubs of people working together to find solutions to problems that commonly confront us, even more so now than when I was at university in the 70s, or people before my generation as well. So part of the answer is about building trust and a culture of a different way of doing things. Talitsi really put his finger on the nail there. The other part is how the rules of the system are designed to incentivize certain kinds of behaviors, not at an institutional level, but at a system level, to try to get the institutions to collaborate much better, much more successful at scaled up level to make really societal macroeconomic impact on the sort of changes that we want to bring about. But I want to pose just one final question, maybe as a couple of comments from all of you. I think we've got about 3 minutes or so left in our you know, one of the things that strike me about human crises over several generations is that people get knocked for a period. You know, there was a Y2K crisis, and then everybody went berserk for 18 months, and then the world didn't end, as you may recall, Jasper and colleagues as well. And then we had several other, the global economic financial crisis, 2007, 2008. I mean, it was really terrible. Millions of people lost it, but the world did not end. And we sort of bounced back in some way as well. And of course, now you have COVID-19 for 18 months or so, and it may last for, you know, another year or so till it gets out of you know, the system. But we almost then start with a new crisis, and it's almost as if and then we develop some very interesting novel responses in that moment of crisis, and it's almost as if we abandon that and we move on to the next element. So my question really is, are there things in our system, in our ecosystem, as small as it is, as fragmented as it is, as you guys have pointed out, that we actually have building blocks, you know, of strong capability, excellence in the system that we can use then as a basis on which we can then lift the floor to build new things. And I'm thinking about the Norwegians, for example, what they've done, for example, in the oil and gas industry, how they circulated that capability in aquaculture, and from aquaculture into deep sea mining and automation and so on. So they use the same sort of engineering, science, technology capability, and they sort of circulated it, you know, in different parts of the economy. So the question that I have is parting comments from each one of you, colleagues. Are there things in our system, and this includes Botswana too, Jasper, that we can recognize as foundational elements upon which we can build sources of strength for projecting innovation at a higher plane and to express itself perhaps at a different level, that you feel confident despite all the problems that we've been moaning about? Are there things you guys can say? We've got 3 things I can identify that we can use as building blocks for innovation going forward. Maybe starting with Mosa, you, and then Silitsi, and then by conclusion, Jasper. Thanks.
So I'll just speak to one thing, Derek and colleagues, and I think that is the fact that part of the issue is that the leadership for everything that we do is driven by a political system that responds to crisis and changes frequently in many ways. And so we are not able to have the building blocks necessary for long-term solutions and long-term strategic initiatives. And so I think that that's what we need. And we need to be able to give some degree of independence to our institutions that are supposed to help us drive those strategic initiatives. I mean, I don't know why the Academy of Science of South Africa, for example, does not take a much more leadership role in driving some of these things, lifting things off the floor. And we can identify other institutions. I mean, some of these councils could play that role, but they don't have the independence that they need to be able to drive innovation. We need independent institutions that can have a long-term view, that is not necessarily going to, be subjugate to the political system as we know it currently. Let me pause there.
Thank you, sir. Silitsi?
No, thank you very much. I think that the big advantage that we have in South Africa is that we actually have strong institutions. I mean, our universities. I mean, just look at the CSIR. We are all talking about multidisciplinarity as an important factor for innovation. But CSIR is a multidisciplinary institution. Inside you have defense, you have manufacturing, you have bio, you have mining, you have ICT, and so on and so forth. And it is organized in such. So it is designed as a multidisciplinary institution. So we have strong institutions, and thirdly, I think the fact that we live in in SADC with all the diversity of challenges that we face in Southern Africa, the issues of migration, issues of languages, those are issues that we should use as a basis of our innovation. While Apple has created Siri, it does not recognize African languages. Can't the CSIR come up with something that will be able to include our people? Lastly, one thing that has often worried me, and Derek, I hope you're going to take it forward in your platform, is our IP policy.
Yes.
Our IP policy worries me. The fact that I can be able to go and register a software as a patent in the United States, and I can't do it in South Africa. It's actually quite worrying, And the reason is because we have not updated our policy, certainly from the Cyprus side, to be in the era in which we live in. It is still in the industrial age. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Siditi. Jasper, last word?
Yeah, last couple of words. Well, of course, being a biotechnologist, I would say biotechnology is an area in which the country has a huge capacity to grow and develop its industries. Has been tremendously successful in some area, and while biotech is my favorite topic, and genomics in particular, and some of the work that's been done recently with COVID, and I won't call out individual people, but the work that's been done is really world-class. It's really impressive to see the speed with which that set of technologies have been adapted and utilized effectively. But it's not only biotech. I mean, there are several other areas where things can go well. And then I want to pick up on Jalice's last remark and say, I think we also need to see IP in the opposite direction. There's an enormous amount of IP in the world which is not protected in Africa. And we don't take advantage of that. We don't look at it and say, oh, there's a process we could utilize. It's absolutely world-class, but they didn't patent it in Botswana because nobody in Botswana was going to use it, so they didn't bother. Now we're free to operate. We're not looking at that side. We're looking and saying, can we patent things that we've developed here, where in fact we're simply not at that stage yet. And to get to that stage, we need to learn to exploit the knowledge that's out there. And this is a big space, which I think we're all pretending it doesn't exist, and it does exist. It's a hugely valuable opportunity. And, if I've got an IP officer, I'd rather they were looking at technologies we could take advantage of than trying to run around the university and find some old IP they think they could patent, which they can't. So those are my few thoughts.
Great stuff, guys. Thanks very much for this. We've overstayed our welcome, but I think colleagues must have enjoyed these commentaries from you all. It's a pity we're all men, but at least we are all Africans here in this conversation. Thanks very much for the host, and thank you guys for a superb set of presentations and discussions. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Derek.
Thank you, Derek.
Yes, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.